Welcome, beloved ones. We are together on the forming edge of many thresholds. Our common shared thresholds include this new year itself, the season of gradual increase in our daily portion of light, the COVID vaccine and new public health leadership with its potential to reduce over the course of the coming year worldwide sickness and death from this virus pandemic. The coming of a new political leader for our common governance as dwellers in these United States of America. And most pertinent to First Parish Northborough, you enter this threshold moment of your congregational life with a sabbatical time, a time out from the ordinary, typical, the routine. I'm Reverend Abigail Stockman, and I am honored that Reverend Linda brought us together so I can serve as your temporary sabbatical minister for worship while Reverend Linda takes this sacred time away from her congregational duties. She will return on Easter Sunday, April 1st, no fooling, to begin the next phase of your covenanted journey in ministry together. And I want to say I live in a home with 2 dogs. So if there's additional noise, I will mute myself quickly, but probably not before you hear some barking. And in the meanwhile, while Reverend Linda is gone, your governing board and sabbatical committee, which is Ann Leno, Carolyn McDonald, and Karen Nelson, are here with you to hold the larger ministry of this congregation as you pass together across this threshold. On behalf of the sabbatical committee, Karen will light our chalice today. So if you have a chalice or a candle near you or with you, take this moment to light it as Karen lights one for all of us, and I'm gonna go light mine as well.
Chalice Lighting for the New Year by Lisa Doge, adapted. For the new year, just days old, beginning today, always beginning. For beginnings that emerge out of endings, appear amidst continuity, become visible in hindsight. For all the times and all the ways we have begun anew together. We light our chalice. A symbol of faith, perseverance, and hope. We light it in astonished thanksgiving and irrepressible praise.
We begin this new year with a series on doorways and thresholds, attuning our spiritual ears, eyes, and hearts toward the many thresholds that arise in our lives and the doors we go through when it's our time to pass through a new opening. It is always a blessing to come together, even if we must, for our common safety and well-being, continue to do so in this virtual format. This moment of this day, we gather again and mark by our act of witness that the spirit of life is within, among, between, and beyond us on the threshold of this new year, new beginning.
There are moments in your life that stay with you forever. There are moments in Every time we close a chapter, we will have a new beginning. Even though the time we had is gone. Every time we close a chapter, we will have a new beginning. We know endings start. A new beginning. A new beginning. There are people in your life who stay with you forever. There are people in your life who change the way you are. There are people who lift you up and give you hope. Now as we stand on the edge of the doorstep, we all have learned. Every time we close a chapter, we will have a new beginning. Even though the time we had is gone. Every time we close a chapter, we will have a new beginning. We know endings start. A new beginning. A new beginning. You have changed us. You have changed us. Part of who we are. We will carry you in our heart, in our heart. Every time we close a chapter, we will have a new beginning. Even though the time we had is gone. Every time we close a chapter, we will have a new beginning. We know endings start. A new beginning. A new beginning. There are people in your life who stay with you forever, forever, forever.
That was so beautiful. Thank you. Our story for the generations this morning is adapted from a short story by Sarabi Gupta. Ria entered the coffee shop. It was relatively empty today, of course. Everyone wanted to welcome the new year with a bang and boom. For her, she just wanted to spend some quality time with her dear friend. She looked around and saw Abdul sitting in their favorite seat, overlooking the unobstructed view of the beach. He had his back toward Ria. She went ahead and closed his eyes from behind. It was a little game that she loved playing with him, where Abdul would guess every name except for hers, and she would just shrug at the false names and laugh. But today, he just said her name and turned to face her. Not fair, she made a face, sitting in the seat opposite his. Sitting in the coffee shop until 12 noon when the clock struck. That was the plan. They spent hours talking about all the beautiful memories they had shared, laughing and reliving each one of them. And then Abdul shattered the beautiful moments with his words. So, this is it. We won't be meeting after this. With these words, Ria's smile disappeared and tears crowded her eyes. It was a fact she knew, a fact both of them knew, but him saying it aloud made it so much more painful. She held his hands and let the pain flow, making no attempt to control her tears. The clock was ticking. almost a few minutes left for the new year. A new year which was not only going to change calendars, but also turn a big page in both of their lives. They were both moving to new lands far away from one another. As the needles of the clock shifted and met, they hugged and turned their backs to one another, putting an end to their long tradition. Each one realized that life is made of many moments, moments that are treasured as time passes. The moments always lead to thresholds that bring with them change. Either way, there are always moments, moments to treasure, and something new, a not yet known moment still to come. Here ends our story for today.
As we treasure this moment, may we find a place where our body can relax as we breathe together on the threshold of this new year, this change. Let us take 3 deep breaths in and out, here on the edge of a common prayer, noticing our bodies and attending to the experience of our lungs, taking in each new breath and risking letting it go as we breathe out. And again. And one last time. We gather in this moment of this new day on this threshold. We witness to one another and our common endeavor as a congregation, as Unitarian Universalists, moving toward the threshold of beloved community. We carry with us gratitude for life, and may we note especially gratitude for those who risk their lives in these days for the well-being of our communities and our country. Essential workers laboring in the various fields of personal and health care, including mental health in this pandemic time. Firefighters who brave the ravages of climate change fires. Those police who work with their communities to promote peace, knowing that at the heart of our working democracy is an agreement and shared responsibility to abide by a set of common laws. Those whose paid employment has them keeping our public transportation moving, and who deliver to us the goods we need as we shelter or quarantine in our homes. Let us mourn for a culture whose safety nets have become so riddled with holes that the remaining netting is too thin to provide any real safety, let alone uphold all human dignity and care for this universe, which is our common home. Let us be grateful for each meaningful, hopeful action done to reweave a stronger net and to increase beauty and kindness in this world. May we carry our joys for the gift of creation and being, alongside our sorrows for that which has been taken or lost. We know in our mind that all beginnings must come to an end, transition, and thresholds to change. We make room for our hearts to relearn this hard truth. each time grief arrives at the threshold of our being. In the name of all that is holy and sacred, in the hope of our common Unitarian Universalist faith, unclench us from our certainties that we may hold each new moment as a threshold of possibility and promise. We continue the possibility of this moment when we may sing together in the way we do these days, not able to hear one another, as Olga plays and sings the hymn, and the words will be on our screen if the gods of video technology are willing. And you may join in singing with your sound muted. Louis Untermeyer, who lived from 1885 to 1977, is the author of this hymn's text, and he was the 14th Poet Laureate of the United States. He and his dear friend Robert Frost corresponded and supported one another in their art for close to 50 years. Untermeyer's poems appealed to the growing religious humanist movement among the mid-20th century Unitarians because, like much fine poetry, Untermeyer addresses divine mystery with genuine curiosity, unattached to dogma or doctrine or certainty. The poetic title of this hymn was Prayer for This House. In our hymnal, it's called May Nothing Evil Cross This Door, and it's the very first hymn, appropriate for the new year. We offer it today as a prayer not only for physical houses, but for the common house of our earth and universe in which all beings dwell. We offer it on the threshold of this new year's for our congregation, for all the homes where we dwell and where during this pandemic, most aspects of our lives unfold. For those whose homes were or being ravaged in wars or fires and are now perhaps rebuilding. For those whose homes do not consist of four walls and a roof, but who take shelter under the stars or on the streets or in refugee camps with little protection or stability. And we offer it for all homes and all the families they shelter everywhere. May we carry this prayer on our lips, in our ears, and in our hearts for each and every dwelling, building, and sheltering space we enter.
Let me through.
for the blessing of being together in community, we hold all these joys, sorrows, and concerns in our hearts. Singing together, draw the circle wide.
Draw the circle wide. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide.
I love that song and move that you choose to sing it at the end of your joys and sorrows. I traveled one summer in Transylvania with a Unitarian Universalist choir, and we sang that song at each venue, at each Unitarian community we went to in Transylvania. With a delightful lightness in this children's poem, Halfway Down, A.A. Milne captured something of the spirit of being on a threshold in a liminal space of neither here nor there. The space of having left somewhere, but not yet having arrived elsewhere. Halfway down the stairs is a stair where I sit. There isn't any other stair quite like it. I'm not at the bottom, I'm not at the top. So this is the stair where I always stop. Halfway up the stairs isn't up, and it isn't down. It isn't in the nursery, and it isn't in town. And all sorts of funny thoughts run round my head. It isn't really anywhere, it's somewhere else instead. But when we get off the stair and go up or down and we arrive, how will we know where we are? What will help us to know the place to which we are going, the threshold we have just crossed? The central statement of Jewish belief is known as the Shema, and the word Shema means to hear, to listen, or to heed. And it comes from the Torah, one of the first 5 books in the Bible, in this case, Deuteronomy. It's in chapter 6, verse 4, which is the very first sentence of our reading. It affirms the central idea of Judaism, that is the belief in one God. It was the Christian Unitarians' affirmation of this one God and not Trinity that earned us heretical status in history and the name Unitarian. The reading continues with a few more sentences that are commandments for how to stay in right relationship, to stay in covenant with this monotheistic God, and by inference with the whole covenanted community. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 11. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Keep these words that I am commanding you today in your heart. Recite them to your children and talk about them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Fix them as an emblem on your forehead and write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. On the threshold. What is a threshold anyway? We can all visualize one, the doorway that you pass through into the place where you are now. Out of another room, maybe up the steps at the front of your home, slightly sheltered from the weather by an overhang is a threshold, or even perhaps a small portico roof held up by columns. There are many different images for thresholds, arches, both natural and constructed, long hallways, sculpted greenery, and stairways or steps. In addition to the definition of threshold as the sill, the ground or bottom of a doorway, a threshold may be a gate or a door, an end or a boundary. It can denote some point at which a change takes place, like the threshold of childhood marked in many religious cultures by a ritual such as a bar, bat mitzvah, or confirmation. My visual image for a threshold is the double door width of a 10-inch wide piece of granite that graced the 1851 farmhouse I recently sold and moved out of. I remember how amazed both the builder and I were when he removed the front wall and the single front door to discover this beautiful piece of local Vermont granite that was the original threshold for that farmhouse. Take a moment to think about how you're crossing the most recent threshold into the room or house or your vehicle, wherever you are seated now, felt. Was the air temperature different in this room from the one you came out of? Is the light different? Does it buoy your spirit? Or perhaps it's a more challenging space. That moment of crossing the threshold is one we often don't notice. And yet, there are things that change. What is the history of time spent alone or with others in this place, room, or seat where you are that might have some effect on you whenever you're in this place? Knowing that you are sitting in this place to come to church today, which is different from how you may use it at other times, did that affect the way you think or feel about the space now? Thresholds are places of transition. We are shifting, transitioning from what was before into what is to come. Most Jewish households have a mezuzah affixed to the opening, the doorway in their homes. The mezuzah is the container, often beautifully decorated, that contains those 6 sentences we just heard from Deuteronomy. When I was a child visiting my New York City relatives from the suburbs, I remember always being both curious and delighted by the many mezuzahs we saw on both my relatives and their neighbors' doorways. The purpose for Jews of posting these words is to remember that they have bound themselves to a covenantal relationship with God, and that these must be the principles that gird their household and hold its human relationships as well. It is a recognition that doorways are places of transition. When entering a mosque to gather for prayer, shoes are removed at the doorway to signify that this is a place set apart from the world outside. In the earth-centered Wiccan practices, when there's no formal building to hold, where there's no formal building to hold a sacred space, each gathering for worship draws, with word and action, a sacred circle that is set apart from the time and space surrounding it. Each circle must contain a doorway, a place of transition that everyone must cross as they enter and leave the circle. I think it's likely, though I don't have enough formal information as evidence, that most cultures recognize particular physical places of transition as possessing some sort of special, sacred quality or power. Among the Celts, the places where the water came up out of the earth, natural wells and springs, were often associated with the divine or the fairy folk and were held as sacred. Equally important were crossroads as places of transition where one could choose to go in a different direction. Perhaps in your life you've made plans or simply held a certainty that your life would move or take shape in a particular manner. And then perhaps, like me, you have found yourself at an unexpected crossroads or doorway where you could or must shift. In my own life, this came with the possibility of when the possibility of divorce arose. It had not been part of my plan, but there it was. And eventually I chose that door. The word threshold, according to Merriam-Webster online, is derived from the English word that is similar to the word for the Old English word, similar to the word for thresh, which is the act of separating the wheat and the chaff. The wheat being the seed and the chaff, its husk or covering. The seed carries the nutrition, the possibility for new life in the future. When we cross a threshold, we are separating ourselves from what was into what will be. We are perhaps choosing what seed we now need to be. Sometimes the threshold is crossed after heartfelt, even difficult discernment about what is truly written on the doorposts of one's life and heart. Transitions like the one alluded to in the story of Ria today offer us the chance to decide what is useful and meaningful, what is aligned with our deepest values from that which is not, what is at the heart of where we want to focus our attentions, our spirits, and our well-being, or as Mary Oliver so beautifully says, our one precious life. And as the story reminds us, each choice or the new means letting go of the old, saying goodbye. We also need time out of the ordinary, fast-paced, decision-demanding every day, though COVID has provided many of us with this. But we need that intentional time to discern our deepest values and our path for this one precious life today, which may be different from how it was a week ago or how it will be next week. We need that time out of time, or as the adult A.A. Milne creates it in the mouth of his fictional Christopher Robin, a place where all sorts of funny thoughts run around our heads. It isn't really anywhere, it's somewhere else instead. The word for time spent on these spiritual thresholds before we cross into or out of is called liminal space. It's considered to be an especially sacred time and is often ritualized. Liminal space is neither here nor there. And it is a place where all manner of thoughts can run around our heads so that we can intentionally listen, opening ourselves to discerning what of those thoughts, which of those thoughts we need to heed, to listen to. And that may help us know which doorway is ours to enter, which threshold ours to cross. I don't know if the photo in the video of the little dog trying to get in the doggy door with the orange coat, but that was a little dog trying to get in a cat door, no longer her threshold to cross. It's important to know which are not our thresholds to cross as well. But taking intentional liminal space time in our lives provides us a way to transition from the person we have been into the person we are becoming. A moment to step outside of ourselves, letting go if we are able, to just listen to ourselves. Because as our story told us, transition thresholds always bring change. Sabbath, though typically thought of as a day of rest, might also be considered a day of transition, an intentionally liminal space where we step outside of our ordinary everyday. The weekly Sabbath, which our Unitarian Universalist tradition follows in the Christian tradition of Sunday, as the day when we gather as a community to worship. To worship meaning to rebind ourselves to our principles and purposes, to what is holy and sacred. If we are to follow some of the, if we were, and if we observe some of the more strict Sabbath practices in other traditions, we might see them as practices intended to remove us from our everyday and bring us into a weekly, intentional, liminal space. In the Jewish Sabbath tradition, one literally does not use anything electric. So no computers, no cell phones, as a way of taking time out of time. Among communities like the Amish, there is an ongoing time out of timeness in that practice. Removing us from the daily routines, distractions, and functions so that we might choose to recommit or retransition back into the relationships we consider holy and meaningful. Those relationships with people, with our work, with our environment, with truth and beauty and goodness, are the relationship whose light is a symbol of faith, perseverance, and hope. At the beginning of this new year and with your settled minister, Reverend Linda, you have begun your ministry together in an intentionally liminal space, providing you and Reverend Linda a sacred way to renew your compasses, your creative spirits, for the doorway you will open together upon her return. We are at a place of new beginnings. The threshold back into the everyday world from these moments out of time in our liminal space of worship together. May we return to the world renewed and recommitted to binding on our hearts faith, perseverance, and hope in astonished thanksgiving and irrepressible praise. So may it be.